So I have with me today Colin Andrews, who by profession is a chartered surveyor, but he's also absolutely passionate about biodiversity and all that entails. And he's talking to us today about the significance of trees. So welcome, Colin. Thank you so much for coming along. And my first question to you today is, what is a native tree?
There's an argument raging about this, but way back about 10,000 years ago, the North Sea wasn't the North Sea because it was blocked by ice at the north, and there was a huge flood that made the channel and separated us from the mainland. And so, strictly speaking, the plants that were living in the UK then are native, and anything that wasn't isn't. But I think that's nonsense. If you have a bird that the next day flew over, ate a berry on the other side, flew back, pooped, and that berry seed turned into a tree, is that not native? I don't know. So I can tell you the sweet chestnut arrived when the Romans arrived, just AD 55, AD 60. The conker tree, the horse chestnut, arrived in the 1537, they reckon, from Turkey. The mulberry bush arrived from the Mediterranean in about 1315. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a movable feast, but the strict interpretation is if they were here 10,000 years ago, which would be very limited amount, then they're native.
Great, that's wonderful. So should we be planting trees?
Right. There's big mass planting trees which have their function, but the problem with mass planting is it tends to be single variety, which is not a good idea. Our treescape in this country, left to nature, would be mixed. There would be areas that were no trees, there would be areas of scrub, there would be areas of big trees, there would be lone trees, and then there would be spinneys and copses and hedgerows and all that sort of thing. Yes, we should be planting trees. Yes, we're the least treed country in Europe. Yeah. And our hedgerows have taken a battering since 1945. We've lost so many thousand miles of those wonderful hedgerows, which had mixed species. Yes, we should be planting, but not just, it's got to be the right trees in the right place, but yes.
Right, yeah, no, I see that. But what trees are best for the countryside?
One of the best ways of working out what trees you might want to plant on some road verge or in a field, if you're lucky enough to have one, is have a look at what is growing there at the moment. Rule out the exotics. That's the ones that are obviously from abroad. You know, Japanese maple is from Japan, so you're not going to want to put that in. But have a look in the hedgerows and take a guide from that. But you can also go on the Tree Council or any of the websites and put in native trees, and you will see a list comes up. And they're about, the basic list is about 22, 23 different trees, and they are all feeding animals, insects, and fungi, all of which are vital for our biodiversity.
And are they good for food, Colin? Are trees generally good for food?
When we were hunter-gatherers, that's what we did. We hunted for a few animals, but basically we foraged. And you can forage. I bet there aren't many people who haven't foraged for blackberries. That's the obvious one. But there are so many trees that produce delicious foods. So obviously you've got apples and damsons and cherry plums, all those. Then you've got the nut trees, or the sweet chestnut. Okay, that might not be native depending on where you'll stand. The hazel certainly is native. The beech is certainly native. You can make coffee out of acorns, which they did during the Depression, and you get a lovely flour out of beech mast, and you can get it. So yes, there's a lot. And then you go into elder, and the flowers you can make a lovely cordial with, and the fruits make added to blackberry or apple, make a excellent, rich in vitamin C food. So yes, very much so.
Now, a bit of a silly question now, because I do know the answer, but I'd love to hear your answer. Biodiversity, is it really important, and how can trees help?
If we allow the world to go on as it is, and we lose a lot more of our biodiversity, then that is going to threaten our very existence. So biodiversity is important. If I say that 97.5% of our water meadows in Britain have gone in the last 70 years, 97.5%. Now, a water meadow is a meadow that doesn't get ploughed. It gets cropped by animals, but it's basically nature in its basic form. So it has a huge amount of different grasses and wildflowers in it. Every one of those species supports 1, 2, 10 different insect species, grub species, and every one of those insects plays its part in the biodiverse biome that we live in. When I was a child of 7, I lived in Ringwood, and we occasionally, every 3 months, drove to Southampton. We would have to stop on the drive over the forest to clean the windscreen from the splattered bodies of poor insects that had. You can drive all the way up to Scotland and not have to clean your windscreen now. So that's what's happened to biodiversity, and have no doubt every one of those insects had a place in our biome. So yes, really important.
Gosh, it's very frightening, isn't it, Colin? Really frightening. So is it easy to plant trees?
Well, if it was really difficult to plant trees, then nature wouldn't manage it. But nature manages it really well without much help from us. Of course, we make it difficult because we come along with lawn mowers. There's no better way of stopping a tree growing than mowing it. We crop our fields with huge machineries. But if you look up in the forest where there's some gorse or brambles or blackthorn, in the middle of that, very often you'll see a tree poking its head out. In fact, we call blackthorn and hawthorn the mother of trees. And the reason for that is that you can't have a rabbit or a deer or a person nipping off that small sapling. So it grows up in safety. So that's nature doing it. For us, we do it. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best is today. And the way you plant it is very simple. If you take a bare root tree, then you have to plant between November and March. And you make a slot in the ground, a T to it, open it up, make sure the roots are splayed out and you don't push it in too deep or leave it standing out too high, and squeeze it down. And with a bit of care and love and attention, it'll go. It probably doesn't need that much, but weeds around it need to be mulched to stop the weeds taking all the nutrients and the water that's meant to feed the root. Yes, so it is easy.
So I'm going to be starting to plant trees from next month then, if you said from November, just right.
Exactly, and you'll be able to, you can only buy bare root, which are very cheap. Bare root trees, they'll start at about 50 pence each, and you will buy them only when they're dormant. Then they can be dug up and it doesn't damage them because they've gone to sleep. So you can put them in, and then when they wake up, they're in a new bit of ground. So yes, they will be lifting them typically in the 3rd week. Well, it might be a bit later this year because it's warmer, probably 2nd week of November, maybe 3rd week, up in Scotland a bit earlier.
And what trees would you say are good for the average garden?
Right, well, it depends on the size of garden. So one tree that I love for a small garden, because the leaves aren't too big and it doesn't create too much shade in summer, and it's clear in winter, is the birch, Betulus. Now, the silver birch is a beautiful tree. It's got small leaves, so when they drop, they're not quite the pain in the neck that, say, chestnut leaves are, or hazel leaves. So that's quite nice. But of course, if you're in a small garden, you might want produce from it. So I would definitely say damson. I would definitely say if you can get fruit trees that you can splay along a fence, they're called espalier, or there are different ways of doing it. You can buy those from the nursery. And then you've got a whole range of trees that attract birds and insects. And they are, obviously buddleia is not a native, but what is rowan, guelder rose, which is a type of I've forgotten what the Latin name is, but they're very common, and also dogwood and rambling rose. All those are lovely in a garden, particularly on the edges if it's a small garden. If you've got a bigger garden, then you've got much more choice. You can go for beautiful trees like the hornbeam. Beautiful tree, lovely shape to it, lots of insects live in it. The field maple is the same, but they are bigger trees.
Great. Well, Colin, thank you so very much for that. It was so fascinating. And I know that you kindly said you would come back and talk about some groups of 3 tree species and just how to identify them and what their uses are. So
yes.
we really look forward to that. And thank you very much again. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure. Bye.